Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so picking up with Venom Volume 2, which is Oversight, this is actually pretty cool. All right, here's the funny thing about this. All right, and this, again, like we've talked about this before, and we're going to kind of rehash this a little bit again, just for people who are new. So the idea behind this is that this is, in a lot of ways, kind of a soft reboot, but it comes off the heels of really like one of the biggest changes in like the whole Spider-Man / Venom mythos, which was part of Marvel Legacy and like the death of Flash Thompson. The idea behind this is that, again, you know, because it's the second volume, kind of comes off the heels of the first, which is to say like the death of the Venom god, but at the same time, the events of like Eddie Brock. Now, of course, with it only being volume 1, we kind of assumed that like Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote wouldn't actually be killed. Instead, it was just kind of left on this sort of ambiguous tone of like, what will happen next? And so what this does is it picks up with like some guy who's basically speaking directly to Eddie and essentially kind of rapping or kind of running over like the things that happen. And from the perspective of Eddie, the way this played out is that Eddie Brock himself, along with the Venom symbiote, had destroyed like Null the Venom god. And then like that was the end of that. And then basically like the Venom symbiote seems to have either been killed or like out of commission. And then somewhere along the line, Eddie Brock just like woke up in this place where this guy's essentially talking to him, wanting to know where the sample went. And the reason why was because after Venom and Eddie Brock had defeated Null, somebody came along and then gathered a sample of the Venom symbiote. But Eddie himself has no idea where the Venom symbiote is. And when this guy starts referencing things like Project Pegasus and starts talking about, hey, like I work for an organization and things along those lines, Eddie's assumption is that it's S.H.I.E.L.D. And the reason why is because, one, the suit this guy's wearing bears the color scheme of S.H.I.E.L.D., and two, because this is how S.H.I.E.L.D. would do things. But then we end up finding out that this guy is actually the Maker. Now, the Maker has been a free-floating character in Marvel Comics for like 4 years. Ever since Secret Wars happened in 2015, Marvel's never really done anything with him. And it's one of those funny situations because the Maker came around so close to the end of the Ultimate Universe and like the launch of Secret Wars that it was one of those things where like when Secret Wars happened and like the multiverse collapsed and then it was all recreated by the main Marvel Universe, Reed Richards, the Maker was just kind of floating around there and anybody could have done anything with him. Ultimately, they didn't. He's just kind of there for like a villain, I think, in like the New Avengers with Robert DaCosta. And then like that was it. It was a couple other appearances here and there. And this is really like the next instance where he's being used. But the idea is that Maker's essentially working for an organization which initially took the sample of the Venom symbiote after, you know, everything happened with Null, and then somebody stole it from Reed. And so that's kind of the question is, who was it that took it? Who was it that stole it? And their assumption is that it's Eddie Brock. And the way that Maker kind of talks here is that Eddie Brock's not fully aware of what's going on. And that's kind of the irony here, because we always sort of assume that even if Eddie Brock doesn't recall everything, what he forgets, the Venom symbiote remembers. And that's where the question kind of comes into of like, where's the Venom symbiote in all of this? And that's what it sort of comes to an explanation, because what the Maker does is basically say, what actually happened here is not what you believe. What you believe is that you defeated Null and the Venom symbiote wasn't answering you when you were talking to it. You kind of collapsed, you thought you died, and then like you woke up here sometime later. What he basically says is, it's been 5 weeks since the defeat of Null. And it's kind of crazy because what he says is like, when that all happened and my guy showed up in order to take a sample, all hell broke loose. Like the Venom symbiote just kind of reacted instinctively, bonded itself to you, killed like 4 of my men, and then took off. And for the next 3 weeks, we had no idea where you were. It took us forever to track you down, but when we did, we tracked you down to your father's house. And it's kind of a cool thing because the question Eddie Brock has and the question we as the reader have is why the house of his father? And of course, that'll be explained later on. But at the moment, it's just kind of like, why this of all places? Because we know the relationship between Eddie and his father wasn't like the greatest thing ever. Now, of course, ultimately he was caught and he was brought here, but 5 weeks have passed. It's been 3 weeks while he was on the run, and for the last 2 weeks he's been here. And so what seems to have gone on is that there's been this kind of cyclical pattern that like Eddie Brock is brought in, Eddie Brock is interrogated, and then for some reason that's never fully explained, the Venom symbiote plays this kind of role as protector for Eddie and then wipes his mind of the memories of what he's been experiencing for the last 2 weeks. And so effectively every day is the first day. Every day is the new day for Eddie. And it's kind of a cool thing here because what Reed kind of speculates here, and it's one of the things he doesn't really even know, what Maker kind of speculates here is that like, because the Venom symbiote is for all intents and purposes brain dead, what it means is that it's just kind of like wiping sections of his mind away. It's playing the role of a protector. It's never actually left Eddie. It's been with him the whole time. But it's kind of a crazy thing. And the reason why I say it's a bit of a soft reboot is because what Donny Cates seems to be doing here is essentially kind of wiping away a lot of the Venom stuff that came before him, which is to say the personality of Venom, the idea that like it relates relates to the host. So like it was a bad guy originally when it first bonded to Eddie, then it became a good guy when it bonded to Flash Thompson, and now it, then it went to kind of maintain the good guy role as part of Eddie. Now it's just kind of being just an organism that's there. And what it does is it kind of sets the stage for Donny Cates to go in a couple different ways. Either he can bring it back and kind of return the personality of the Venom symbiote, kind of turn this into like an arc really more for the symbiote than for Eddie, kind of like its death and rebirth, or he could build it up into something else completely. But the explanation that's given here is that the Venom symbiote was able to maintain its autonomy, able to kind of maintain its personality, things like that, because it was tied into the hive mind of like all the Venoms, and the connection to that hive mind was basically like the mind or the existence of like the symbiote god. But when Null was destroyed, the connection went with it. And so basically this symbiote, as it's bonded to Eddie, is just kind of a free-floating item out there. It's no different than like a knife or a hammer. And so it's kind of a crazy thing, because what Maker ends up doing is basically saying, hey, look, like along the way, we've learned little bits of information here. We've learned little tidbits here. And all this really kind of comes out of the death of Flash Thompson, which is interesting because Eddie didn't know that Flash Thompson died. Now, the reason for that is because a lot of that was kind of wrapping up the Flash Thompson arc, which had been going on for quite some time. Like it really started with Agent Venom, maybe a little bit before then, and it had been running for more than a little bit. But what this did is it went into the events of Marvel Legacy and Amazing Spider-Man number 800, which essentially had like Flash Thompson as Agent Venom being killed off. And the reason why was because during the whole Red Goblin incident, where you basically had like the Carnage symbiote bonded to Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, it kind of turned into almost like an Ultimate Universe Spider-Man scenario where like you had Green Goblin as or I guess really the Red Goblin, basically like facing off against some of Spider-Man foes and even some of Spider-Man's friends and so on and so forth. But basically like Flash Thompson made the choice to sacrifice his life in order to save the friends of Spider-Man and even Spider-Man himself using his healing abilities. And what that did is it kind of etched in stone the idea that Flash Thompson was kind of like this incorruptible being, right? Like, when he got the Venom symbiote, he wasn't corrupted by it. He wasn't screwed up by it. He became a good guy with it. It's kind of the idea that like Flash Thompson is the basis behind what a hero could truly be. The cool thing about this is that what Maker does is he effectively tells Eddie Brock that what they've learned after taking a sample of Flash Thompson is they learned that like when a symbiote bonds itself to a host, that it never actually leaves entirely. That when a symbiote leaves a host, for example, when the Venom symbiote left left Flash Thompson, what it did is it left a kind of sample of itself on Flash Thompson's DNA. And it's the way in which they kind of communicate with the hive mind, right? So it's like sending out a beacon. It's like planting a flag on Flash Thompson and saying Venom has been here, like Venom was here. And what it means is that by doing that, they could potentially clone Flash Thompson, or at the very least try to understand like how this works in terms of manipulating the human genome and how the Venom symbiote impacts it. And so it's kind of a crazy little scenario here, because what they're looking to do, what literally Maker wants to do, and the guys he's working with, is they want to go to the military cemetery and they want to dig up the body of Flash Thompson. And this sends Eddie Brock into a frenzy. And this is a very, very important thing. And the reason why is because while Eddie Brock and Venom weren't like the best, Eddie Brock and Flash weren't like the best of friends. They weren't besties or anything like that. They do share a commonality in the sense that they were both hosts for the Venom symbiote. But with Eddie learning the means by which Flash basically died, it's kind of like, hey, look, he was an honorable guy. And I'm not going to let you go to a cemetery and dig up the corpse of an honorable man. Not only that, even if the Venom symbiote is kind of brain dead, meaning like its personality and everything is gone, on some kind of rudimentary subconscious level, it does hanker for Flash Thompson, and it does recognize the value of Flash Thompson. And so to do this angers the symbiote as well. And literally it lashes out and starts attacking the Maker, giving Eddie the chance to kind of make his escape. Now, of course, when it does, he basically runs into some of these soldiers using sonic devices and so on and so forth who look to take him out. But the cool thing about this is that when that happens, the vial containing the DNA of Flash Thompson essentially shatters, bonds itself to Eddie Brock, and when it does, Eddie Brock bonds with Flash Thompson, which is kind of crazy, because what this means is that like you have Eddie Brock here, but you have Flash Thompson talking to him the same way that the Venom symbiote talked to Eddie. Now, this opens up a whole new host of possibilities, no pun intended, because what this means here is that by the two of them working together, it could be that Flash Thompson understands the symbiote in a way that Eddie Brock doesn't. And the reason why is because while Eddie Brock was host for the Venom symbiote for a long, long time, a lot of the evolution of the Venom symbiote in terms of what it's capable of, what it can do, a lot of that really came through Flash Thompson. And so with Flash really understanding the Venom symbiote on a much deeper level than Eddie does, in turn, like that information gets passed on, and it's a question of like, what do we do with this symbiote now? How do we kind of regain ourselves? And so at the moment, essentially like Eddie Brock is Agent Venom now. Eddie Brock and Flash Thompson merge and become the new Agent Venom is basically what goes on. But it's kind of a cool thing here, because following this, it basically goes into the question of, again, like who was it that stole this symbiote sample of Eddie Brock? And that's when we kind of pick up with the epilogue of all this, with some shady guy and like a giant torch walking through this cavern, basically. But we end up finding out the reason why this was was done was so that this new Venom, or I guess this Venom symbiote sample can basically be bonded to Cletus Cassidy. And so it's kind of a cool thing because what this means is that Cletus Cassidy, the original Carnage, can make his return, but also he can be modified and become like a new kind of symbiote. And that's kind of a cool thing because the question is like, what would happen if somebody with the Venom symbiote bonded with somebody with the Carnage symbiote? What kind of symbiote would that create? What direction will it take? But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.